Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. Our hero Alvin has escaped Diaspar and made his way to the country of Lys, where he is about to be given a brief lesson in their history. Only the people of Lys are telepaths, so they give their lessons by direct download. Alvin was never sure what happened then. There was a total eclipse of all his senses, and though he could never remember acquiring it, when he looked into his mind, the knowledge was there. He saw back into the past, not clearly, but as a man on some high mountain might look across a misty plain. He understood that man had not always been a city dweller, and that since the machines gave him freedom from toil, there had always been a rivalry between two different types of civilization. In the Dawn Ages, there had been thousands of cities, but a large part of mankind had preferred to live in relatively small communities. Universal transport and instantaneous communication had given them all the contact they required with the rest of the world, and they felt no need to live huddled together with millions of their fellows. Lys had been a little different in the early days from hundreds of other communities, but gradually, over the ages, it had developed an independent culture which was one of the highest that mankind had ever known. It was a culture based largely upon the direct use of mental power, and this set it apart from the rest of human society, which came to rely more and more upon machines. Through the eons they had advanced along their different roads, the gulf between Lys and the cities widened. It was bridged only in times of great crisis, and as when the moon was falling. Its destruction had been carried out by the scientists of Lys. So also was the defense of Earth against the invaders who were held at bay in the final battle of Shalmarain. The great ordeal exhausted mankind. One by one, the cities died and the desert rolled over them. As the population fell, humanity began the migration which was to make Diaspar the last and greatest of all cities. Most of these changes did not affect Lys, but it had its own battle to fight, the battle against the desert. The natural barrier of the mountains was not enough, and many ages passed before the great oasis was made secure. The picture was blurred here, perhaps deliberately. Alvin could not see what had been done to give Lys the virtual eternity that Diaspar had achieved. The voice of Seranus seemed to come to him from a great distance, yet it was not her voice alone, for it was merged into a symphony of words, as though many other tongues were chanting in unison with her. That, very briefly, is our history. You will see that even in the Dawn Ages we had little to do with the cities, though their people often came into our land. We never hindered them, for many of our greatest men came from outside, but when the cities were dying, we did not wish to be involved in their downfall. With the end of air transport, there was only one way into Lys, the carrier system from Diaspar. It was closed at your end when the park was built, and you forgot us, though we have never forgotten you. Diaspar has surprised us. We expected it to go the way of all other cities, but instead it has achieved a stable culture that may last as long as Earth. It is not a culture we admire, yet we are glad that those who wish to escape have been able to do so. More than you might think have made the journey, and they have almost always been outstanding men who brought something of value with them when they came to Lys. The voice faded. The paralysis of Alvin's senses ebbed away, and he was himself again. He saw with astonishment that the sun had fallen far below the trees, and that the eastern sky already held a hint of night. Somewhere a great bell vibrated with a throbbing boom that pulsed slowly into silence, leaving the air tense with mystery and premonition. Alvin found himself trembling slightly, not with the first touch of the evening chill, but through sheer awe and wonder at all that he had learned. It was very late, and he was far from home. He had a sudden need to see his friends again and to be among the familiar sights and scents of Diaspar. I must return, he said. Kedron, my parents, they will be expecting me. This was not wholly true. Kedron would certainly be wondering what had happened to him, but as far as Alvin was aware, no one else knew that he had left Diaspar. He could not have explained the reason for this mild deceit, and was slightly ashamed of himself immediately he had uttered the words. Seranus looked at him thoughtfully. I'm afraid it is not as easy as that, she said. What do you mean? Asked Alvin. Won't the carrier that brought me here take me back again? He still refused to face the fact that he might be held in Lys against his will, though the idea had briefly crossed his mind. For the first time, Seranus seemed slightly ill at ease. We have been talking about you, she said, not explaining who the we might be, nor exactly how they had consulted together. If you return to Diaspar, the whole city will know about us. Even if you promised to say nothing, you would find it impossible to keep our secret. Why should you wish it kept? Asked Alvin. Surely it would be a good thing for both our peoples if they could meet again. Seranus looked displeased. We do not think so, she said. If the gates were opened, our land would be flooded with the idly curious and the sensation seekers. As it is now, only the best of your people have ever reached us. This reply radiated so much unconscious superiority, yet it was based on such false assumptions, that Alvin felt his annoyance quite eclipse his alarm. That isn't true, he said flatly. I do not believe you would find another person in Diaspar who would leave the city, even if he wanted to, even if he knew that there was somewhere to go. If you let me return, it would make no difference to Lys. It is not my decision, explained Seranus, and you underestimate the powers of the mind if you think that the barriers that keep your people inside their city can never be broken. However, we do not wish to hold you here against your will, but if you return to Diaspar, we must erase all memories of Lys from your mind. She hesitated for a moment. This has never arisen before. All your predecessors came here to stay. Here was a choice that Alvin refused to accept. He wanted to explore Lys, to learn all its secrets, to discover the ways in which it differed from his own home. But equally, he was determined to return to Diaspar so that he could prove to his friends that he had been no idle dreamer. He could not understand the reasons prompting this desire for secrecy. Even if he had, it would not have made any difference to his behavior. He realized that he must play for time, or else convince Seranus that what she asked him was impossible. Kedron knows where I am, he said. You cannot erase his memories. Seranus smiled. It was a pleasant smile, and one that in any other circumstances would have been friendly enough. But behind it, Alvin glimpsed for the first time the presence of overwhelming and implacable power. You underestimate us, Alvin, she replied. That would be very easy. I can reach Diaspar more quickly than I can cross Lys. Other men have come here before, and some of them told their friends where they were going. Yet those friends forgot them, and they vanished from the history of Diaspar. Alvin had been foolish to ignore this possibility, though it was obvious now that Seranus had pointed it out. He wondered how many times in the millions of years since the two cultures were separated, men from Lys had gone into Diaspar in order to preserve their jealously guarded secret. And he wondered just how extensive were the mental powers which these strange people possessed and did not hesitate to use. Was it safe to make any plans at all? Seranus had promised that she would not read his mind without his consent, but he wondered if there might be circumstances in which that promise would not be kept. Surely, he said, you don't expect me to make the decision at once. Cannot I see something of your country before I make my choice? Of course, replied Seranus. You can stay here as long as you wish, and still return to Diaspar eventually if you change your mind. But if you can decide within the next few days, it will be very much easier. You do not want your friends to be worried, and the longer you are missing, the harder it will be for us to make the necessary adjustments. Alvin could appreciate that. He would like to know just what those adjustments were. Presumably, someone from Lys would contact Kedron without the jester ever being aware of it and tamper with his mind. The fact of Alvin's disappearance could not be concealed, but the information which he and Kedron had discovered could be obliterated. As the ages passed, Alvin's name would join that of the other uniques who had mysteriously vanished without trace and had then been forgotten. There were many mysteries here, and he seemed no closer to solving any of them. Was there any purpose behind the curious one-sided relationship between Diaspar and Lys, or was it merely an historical accident? Who and what were the uniques, and if the people from Lys could enter Diaspar, why had they not canceled the memory circuits that held the clue to their existence? Perhaps that was the only question to which Alvin could give a plausible answer. The central computer might be too stubborn an opponent to tackle, and would hardly be affected by even the most advanced of mental techniques. He put these problems aside. One day, when he had learned a great deal more, he might have some chance of answering them. It was idle to speculate, to build pyramids of surmise on a foundation of ignorance. Very well, he said, though not too graciously, for he was still annoyed at this unexpected obstacle placed in his path. I'll give you my answer as soon as I can, if you will show me what your land is like. Good, said Ceratus, and this time her smile held no hidden threat. We are proud of Lys, and it will be a pleasure to show you how men can live without the aid of cities. Meanwhile, there is no need for you to worry. Your friends will not be alarmed by your absence. We shall see to that, if only for our own protection. It was the first time Ceratus had ever made a promise which she could not keep. Chapter 11. Try as she would, Illustra could extract no further information from Kedron. The jester had recovered quickly from his initial shock and from the panic which had sent him flying back to the surface when he found himself alone in the depths beneath the tomb. He also felt ashamed of his cowardly behavior and wondered if he would ever have the courage to return to the Chamber of the Moving Ways and the network of world-ranging tunnels which radiated from it. Although he felt that Alvin had been impatient, if not indeed foolhardy, he did not really believe that he would run into any danger. He would return in his own good time, Kedron was certain of that. Well, almost certain. There was just enough doubt to make him feel the need for caution. It would be wise, he decided, to say as little as possible for the time being, and to pass the whole thing off as another joke. Unfortunately for this plan, he had not been able to mask his emotions when Illustra encountered him on his return to the surface. She had seen the fear written so unmistakably in his eyes, and had at once interpreted as meaning that Alvin was in danger. All Kedron's reassurances were in vain, and she became more and more angry with him as they walked together back through the park. At first, Illustra had wanted to remain at the tomb, waiting for Alvin to return in whatever mysterious manner he had vanished. Kedron had managed to convince her that this would be a waste of time, and was relieved when she followed him back to the city. There was a chance that Alvin might return almost at once, and he did not wish anyone else to discover the secret of Yarlan Zay. By the time they had reached the city, it was obvious to Kedron that his evasive tactics had failed completely, and that the situation was seriously out of hand. It was the first time in his life that he had ever been at a loss, and had not felt himself capable of dealing with any problem that arose. His immediate and irrational fear was being slowly replaced by a profounder and more firmly based alarm. Until now, Kedron had given little thought to the consequences of his actions. His own interests and a mild but genuine sympathy toward Alvin had been sufficient motive for all that he had done. Though he had given encouragement and assistance to Alvin, he had never believed that anything like this could ever really happen. Despite the gulf of years and experience between them, Alvin's will had always been more powerful than his own. It was too late to do anything about it now. Kedron felt that events were sweeping him along toward a climax utterly beyond his control. In view of this, it was a little unfair that Illustra obviously regarded him as Alvin's evil genius and showed an inclination to blame him for all that had happened. Illustra was not really vindictive, but she was annoyed, and part of her annoyance focused on Kedron. If any action of hers caused him trouble, she would be the last person to be sorry. They parted in stony silence when they reached the great circular way that surrounded the park. Kedron watched Illustra disappear into the distance and wondered wearily what plans were brewing in her mind. There was only one thing of which he could be certain now. Boredom would not be a serious problem for a considerable time to come. Illustra acted swiftly and with intelligence. She did not bother to contact Ariston and Titania. Alvin's parents were pleasant nonentities for whom she felt some affection but no respect. They would only waste time in futile arguments and would then do exactly as Illustra was doing now. Jesserac listened to her story without apparent emotion. If he was alarmed or surprised, he concealed it well, so well that Illustra was somewhat disappointed. It seemed to her that nothing so extraordinary and important as this had ever happened before, and Jesserac's matter-of-fact behavior made her feel defeated. When she had finished, he questioned her at some length and hinted, without actually saying so, that she might have made a mistake. What reason was there for supposing that Alvin had really left the city? Perhaps it had all been a trick at her expense. The fact that Kedron was involved made this seem highly probable. Alvin might be laughing at her, concealed somewhere in Diaspar this very moment. The only positive reaction she got out of Jesserac was a promise to make inquiries and to contact her again within a day. In the meantime, she was not to worry, and it would also be best if she said nothing to anyone else about the whole affair. There was no need to spread alarm over an incident which would probably be cleared up in a few hours. Illustra left Jesserac in a mood of mild frustration. She would have been more satisfied could she have seen his behavior immediately after she left. Jesserac had friends on the council. He had been a member himself in his long life and might be again if he was unlucky. He called 3 of his most influential colleagues and cautiously aroused their interest. As Alvin's tutor, he was well aware of his own delicate position and was anxious to safeguard himself. For the present, the fewer who knew what had happened, the better. It was immediately agreed that the first thing to do was to contact Kedron and ask him for an explanation. There was only one defect to this excellent plan. Kedron had anticipated it and was nowhere to be found. And we will follow Alvin as he explores Lys and Jesserac as he looks for Alvin next time.